Hello, everybody. Welcome into Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. I hope you're having an amazing Friday. We have a big show for you today. We have a lot to get through. We're going to do some Final Four predictions, both the men's and the women's. The women's start tonight at 7 o'clock. The men's games are tomorrow. We're going to break down all four of those matchups, who I think is going to win, what the major players and storylines are of those games as well. In our second segment, something I was confused by that came out yesterday was the restructuring of Stephon Diggs' contract with the Texans to make it a one-year deal. We'll break down all the ins and outs of that and what that means for the trade overall. In our third segment, LeBron James' son, LeBron James Jr., he declared for the NBA draft. He's also in the transfer portal. We'll talk about his options, where he might end up, if he'll go to the NBA, and if he does go to the NBA, what teams might be looking at in a relatively weak draft class. And we'll close out our show talking about a new trend that I've been seeing in sports about cities saying no to funding stadiums. You know, the Oakland A's, the Oakland Raiders, the Virginia with the Washington Capitals and Nationals, and most recently, Kansas City with the Chiefs. They've all said no in the last 5 years, something that we used to never see happen. So we'll break down that trend and see if it's a good thing or not. But before we get into the show, remember that if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. Leave a tip or donation with a message in it. It'll pop up on the bottom of the screen there for you, me, everybody watching around the world to see. We'll have a little discussion about it. You can control what we talk about on the show. All you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. We appreciate anything that you do give. But like I was saying, we have a big show today, so let's just hop right into it. A Final Four preview. The women's games start tonight. The men's games are tomorrow. We're going to start with the women because they are coming up in just under 2 hours. The first Final Four game of what has been a pretty fun tournament so far. You have the number 3 seed, North Carolina State, taking on the number 1 overall seed, South Carolina. South Carolina with the reigning AP Coach of the Year. South Carolina coming into this matchup undefeated. South Carolina is a juggernaut. They score the most points per game in the entirety of women's basketball. NC State plays fast. Their defense is hard, but going against a roster like South Carolina is going to be tough. Going against one of the best coaches in recent memory of women's college basketball is going to be tough. South Carolina has been at the top of the game ever since about 2015-ish, when UConn started to fall off a little bit. And we'll get to UConn in a little bit, because they definitely have not fallen off. They are here, alive and well, in the Final Four again. 23 times they've been in the Final Four. They are still a juggernaut. But South Carolina has kind of taken that spot away from UConn as the perennial favorites. And they've built, at least in the last 5 years, the team to beat. They have been so good. They haven't lost a game since almost a calendar year ago, when they lost in the Final Four against LSU, who went on to be champions last year. It's crazy how good they've been, and it's cool to see changing of the guard, right? And now they're the juggernaut. They're the team to beat. Everyone's scared of them. 34-0. I went down to South Carolina over my spring break a couple weeks ago, and I was talking to some people that live down there, and they were saying, I'm making bets South Carolina against the field. I'm so confident they're going to win. They have been in one close game this tournament, and other than that, they've blown out their opponents. They won in the first round by more than 50 points. They are, I hate to use that word again, but a juggernaut. There really isn't another word to describe it. They're just so dominant. And they have the AP Coach of the Year. It's gonna be a fun game. The spread is at 11.5, so it's lower than a lot of their other games, but it's still double digit. So Vegas, that tells you what Vegas thinks. Vegas thinks that NC State doesn't stand much of a chance. Their plus 600 odds are not really it. But if you want to take a flyer on an underdog, I would take a flyer on NC State on the other side of the bracket, the men's bracket, rather than the women's here. South Carolina is just head and shoulders above almost everybody else in that sport. So, as far as it goes for predicting games, South Carolina I expect to win to win. I don't know if it'll be handily, but I do expect them to win this game. Heading to the other side, the much more anticipated matchup of the Final Four, maybe the most anticipated matchup of the men's and women's Final Four, Iowa taking on UConn. Iowa plays UConn in the Final Four. Caitlin Clark taking on Paige Beckers in what I think is going to be an incredible game. You have two of the best players in the sport going up against each other, and these two teams around them are really solid. UConn has dealt with a lot of injuries, and they're at the point where coming down to the Final Four, they've lost about 5 players that I was talking to Gary Apple earlier today, anchor on SNY. He does a lot of stuff with UConn's women's basketball team. He was saying that the 5 players that UConn lost to injury, if you put them, just them as a starting 5 together, the 5 players that they've lost, they could compete, they could be national championship contenders. That's how deep this UConn team is. This UConn team lost 5 players that together could compete for a championship, and they're still in the Final Four. They're still in the Final Four going up against Caitlin Clark and that Iowa team that had just about everything rolling for about 75% of that game against LSU. And it's a good toss-up. Really what this game is going to come down to, I think at least, is who plays better between Paige Beckers and Caitlin Clark. Whoever can win that matchup is going to win this game. They're the superstars of these teams. The offense runs through them. The defense on both of these teams is pretty solid. Iowa puts up 90 points a game. A lot of that is Caitlin Clark putting up 30 points a game. But, the rest of the team putting up 60 while she puts up 30 is still pretty impressive. It's very impressive. That team is very good. There's a reason they're a number 1 seed. You can have the best player in the world and the rest of the team sucks. You're not going to be a number 1 seed, Iowa is a very, very good team. They have their flaws. Same thing with UConn. UConn is also a very good team. They're just a little hurt right now. So taking a look at these two, I'm leaning more towards Iowa just because the explosive scoring of Caitlin Clark, her clutch shooting down the stretch. I feel like if it comes down to it, Caitlin Clark is going to be that person that's going to be able to go get that bucket down the stretch. I do think that this one is a game that might even go into overtime. This is going to be a super fun game to watch. It's going to be on at 9:30 tonight, so go check that out. That's going to be the main event tonight. So my finals preview, and we'll just do a whole prediction for the entirety of this. It's going to be Iowa taking on South Carolina, which is what a lot of people had in their brackets heading into it. As much as I'd love to pick Iowa in that game, like I'm saying, South Carolina is just up and down the roster. They're what UConn could be if they were healthy, I think. South Carolina is that team. They're very, very good. They're so good. So, I think South Carolina is going to win this tournament. They get to the Final Four. It's going to be a good game against Iowa. I'm not sure what the line will be set at for that, but it'll be a good game. I think Caitlin Clark can go toe-to-toe with their best player, and really it's going to be the size down low that kills Iowa. Iowa doesn't have a lot of size compared to South Carolina. South Carolina is a very tall team. And you kind of saw it against LSU a little bit when Iowa was getting bullied by Angel Reese down low. She had basically anything she wanted in that second quarter. She had 20 rebounds in a game. Not usually a recipe for success, but their offense is so high-flying that it doesn't matter all that much. Anyway, in our next segment, we're actually just going to push everything back. We've hit this wall a little bit. But in our next segment, we're going to break down the men's. In our next segment coming up, we're going to talk about the preview of UConn taking on Alabama in the men's Final Four, and we are going to talk about Purdue taking on NC State. The storylines there, the fact that for the first time in the history of the sport, we could have the same championship game matchup. Now, we have had the same winner on the men's and women's side 3 times, or 2 times, excuse me. Both of those were UConn. So we could have UConn do that for a third time. Most recently, they did it in 2014, but they also did it in 2003. So they've done it twice in the last 20 years. Looking to make it 3 times for UConn. We will break down everything with the men's side of March Madness coming up next on Sports by GSMC Podcast Network.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows where 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the news it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh, I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Welcome back, everybody, to Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Jeremy Lapidus. If you are just tuning in, we just finished breaking down the women's Final Four, which kicks off tonight at 7 o'clock with South Carolina taking on NC State, and the second game at 9:30 with Iowa taking on UConn. In this segment, we are going to break down the men's Final Four. We're going to talk a little bit about the storylines there, what exactly, predictions-wise, why I think that, and we're going to pick a champion as well. But before we get into it, remember that if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net, leave a tip or donation. You can control what goes on the show. You leave a comment with that tip or donation, it'll pop up on the bottom of the screen. We'll talk about whatever you'd like to talk about. All you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net, leave a tip or donation, and you can control what we talk about in the show. But like I was saying, in this segment, we are going to talk about the men's Final Four. We're going to continue our Final Four preview, this time talking about the men's Final Four. The men's Final Four kicks off tomorrow, so Saturday will be those games. There are 2 games, obviously. UConn, the defending national champion, is taking on the 4 seed Alabama. UConn has dominated their way through the tournament. They have not struggled once. They've won every single game by at least 15 points. And the way that they're playing is scary. There isn't another team in college basketball, in men's college basketball, that's playing as good as they are. They've got the best record in the league. They've only lost 3 games all season. And there's really no reason to think that it will stop now. There are their opponents, the Alabama Crimson Tide. The Alabama Crimson Tide are taking on that dominant UConn team. Alabama has had a very interesting route to get to the Final Four. The way they play basketball is very high pace. It's very run and gun, score points. In the first round, they put up 109 on the College of Charleston, 13 seed there. Then they played the 12 seed Grand Canyon, who they only put up 82 against, but it was a wild game. There was players flopping all over the floor. They end up winning that matchup, advancing to the next round to take on the number one seed, North Carolina, where they put up 89, win a 2 point battle. Again, they're playing tough basketball, but it's all offense. It's all offense. Go go go! Score these points. And then in the Elite Eight, they end up taking on Clemson. They beat Clemson pretty easily. Clemson just did not have the offensive firepower to keep up with Alabama, and now they run into UConn. UConn is of UConn is a team that can keep up with them offensively. I don't think Alabama can contain them defensively. The only way that Alabama wins this game is if they score over 100 points. Now, I expect this game to be extremely high scoring. Like I said, UConn can score with the best of them. They're the best team in the country for a reason, you know? They put up they're winning these games by like 20 or 30 points. They went on a 30-0 run in the Elite 8. In the Elite 8, they went on a 30-0 run against an Illinois team that had the best offense in the nation by KenPom rankings. So they have the ability to shut down these offenses. Alabama needs to score 100 points, at least, to win this game. I expect this game to be much like that first round game where Alabama beat College of Charleston. I expect both of these teams to score over 100. Think back to that Florida Colorado game in the first round, 100 to 102. It's going to be something like that. If you like offense, this is the game to tune into, because if Alabama is going to stand a chance, they are going to need to put up points. They're going to need to shoot lights out against UConn. And it's something that they have proven that they can do. It's the reason that they're in the Final Four. But their defense is not going to be able to contain them. There just isn't really a way for them to play defense against 7'2" guys and the way that they can spread the floor. It just isn't a way for them to do that. So they need to keep pace offensively, and they can. Alabama is one of the only teams in the nation that can keep pace offensively even without defense. So that's what this game is going to come down to. This game is going to come down to if Alabama can score 110 points. I don't think they're going to do it. Like I said, UConn went on a 30-0 run against the number one offensive team by KenPom last round. They are playing a team that's very similar to Illinois. Illinois might even be better on defense, and they dominated them. So, not a great sign, although in the first half it was close. It was a tie game at the first half. So there are ways for Alabama to stay in this game. They just need to continue to shoot, and they need to shoot well. I have UConn winning this game. Going on to the other side of the bracket, the NC State Purdue matchup. This one is also a very interesting matchup. You have the battle of the bigs. Much like the other side of the women's bracket, you have, one dominant team taking on a team that can score, and then a player intrigue matchup. This is the player intrigue matchup. You have the two-time in a row AP Player of the Year in Zach Edey. And you have DJ Burns, who's been the breakout star of the tournament, someone who at 6'7", 295 pounds, has been recruited to play football in the NFL. He shut down those rumors he's not playing football, although I don't quite believe him. If an NFL team asked me to play football, I'd work out. Why not? But DJ Burns, Zach Edey down low is going to be the big matchup. The way that Purdue runs their offense is they space the floor and they run it through Zach Edey. Zach Edey, they get the ball down low. He dominates in the paint as a 7'4" man, someone that almost no one is physically able to guard because he's just so much bigger than them. But they're going to run into a little bit of an issue with DJ Burns. Like I said, DJ Burns isn't 7'4", but he is 6'7", and he's 300 pounds. He has the ability to body Zach Edey out of the way. Zach Edey is not, skinny. He's not built like Chet Holmgren, but he's not going to be able to stand up to a guy who's 300 pounds and only giving up like 6 inches. You know, everyone else that he goes up against, they might be giving up those 8 inches, but they're not 300 pounds bodying you down low. They don't have the footwork, the finesse that DJ Burns has, the ability to pass it out. I think this is kind of a nightmare matchup for Purdue. Purdue is, again, a very good team. They made it to the Final Four. They've been favored forever. This is kind of like their Virginia arc. They lost to the 16 seed last year, and now they're here trying to win a championship. This game comes down to if DJ Burns can out-muscle Zach Edey, because he's not going to outsize him. He just needs to out-physical him. And the issue is going to be fouls, because if you remember back to that Tennessee game, Purdue, Zach Edey shot like 22 free throws. He was 14 for 22. He puts up 40 points. But that made it really impossible to guard him. For a team that already was going to struggle to guard him, DJ Burns needs to be able to play a clean, physical game. If he can do that, if DJ Burns can stay out of foul trouble and be physical enough, I think NC State can win this game. That is a lot of ifs. It's really, really tough to play clean physical basketball. You can do one or the other, but it's really tough to do both. And I'm very curious to see exactly how NC State prepares for him, Zach Edey. You have to. This is a team that their defense has just been flying to the ball all over, and their offense, if it's not DJ Burns' night, he still has the gravity, and he has the ability. He's got some of the best footwork and some of the best post passing that I've seen in the entire tournament. So taking a look at what he's been able to do down low for NC State, I might be a little crazy here. I might be, but I think NC State can win this game. I think NC State really can win this game. Now, when it comes to playing UConn in the finals, a little bit of a different story. UConn doesn't rely so heavily on their big guys, and they can space the floor. They have those 7-footers as well. It's going to be a little harder. I think that NC State is, like I said, it's a nightmare matchup for Purdue. So taking a look at this matchup for what it is, I really think that NC State can win this. Again, there's a lot of factors that are going to play into this, but I think NC State can do it. That's going to be my hot take. NC State is going to win in the Final Four. Take on UConn. That game's not going to be pretty. I think UConn's going to blow them out. So, champions for your men's and women's. UConn in the men's, South Carolina in the women's. Should be some really good games over the weekend. Keep an eye on them. We'll do a men's championship game preview because I believe their championship game is on Monday. So we will be able to do a preview for that coming up on Monday, taking a look at how the Final Four went. But yeah, we're looking at South Carolina, Iowa in the women's, and UConn, NC State in the men's. Let me know what you guys think of my predictions in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Who you think's going to win? Who do you think the X factor will be in these games? Anything else that crossed your mind as we were talking about the Final Four? But anyway, we'll be right back in our next segment. We are going to transition out of the NCAA, talk a little bit about football. There were some new developments in the Stephon Diggs contract. The Stephon Diggs contract was moved to a 1-year deal, shockingly, something that I don't quite understand the Texans doing, but they're going to do it. We'll break down the ripple effects of all of that and more coming up next on Sports by GSMC Podcast Network.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Welcome back, everybody, to Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jeremy Lapidus. If you are just tuning in, we just finished talking about the men's and women's Final Four. We did our little prediction episode, what is going down. We broke down each game. If you missed it, my championship matchups in the women's are South Carolina taking on Iowa, with South Carolina winning, and the men's is going to be UConn taking on NC State, and UConn winning that. But we'll break down all of that more on Monday on our next show next week. In this segment here, we are going to transition into the NFL. We're going to talk a little bit about Stephon Diggs and the fallout from his trade. Some new information came out about that, including a puzzling move by the Texans to cut his contract down to 1 season, something that I don't understand. Maybe they had some kind of agreement there beforehand. But before we get into that, if you would like to control what we talk about on the show, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. Leave a tip or donation with a message in it. It'll pop up on the bottom of the screen there for you, me, everybody else in the rest of the world to see. We'll have a discussion about whatever you would like to have a discussion about. I got any burning questions? Got any topic that you'd think that you'd like to get my opinions on? All you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net and leave a tip or donation. Appreciate anything that you do give. Appreciate you for watching. Once again, that link is gsmcpodcast.net. Like I was saying, though, we're transitioning into the NFL. The big news out of the NFL, at least recently, is Stephon Diggs and his contract. Stephon Diggs was traded to the Texans on Wednesday, I believe, for a second-round pick. The Bills also threw in a 5th and a 6th. Now, on paper, you look at that trade and you say, Stephon Diggs plus a little bit of draft capital, and the Bills are eating $30 million of that contract? They must have gotten something in return. They get a second-round pick, and on the surface, it sounds kind of crazy. That's it. A second-round pick is a pretty hefty price to pay, but it's not even the Texans' second-round pick. It's the second-round pick that they got from the Minnesota Vikings in the trade that they started to move out of the first round to get extra second-round picks. So basically what the Texans have done is moved from spot 23 to spot 42 in the draft for Stephon Diggs. I think that's a great move by the Texans, straight up. And he had term. He had a 4-year contract. He was going to be locked in through the entirety of C.J. Stroud's rookie deal. Until yesterday, when all of a sudden it comes out that the Texans have restructured his contract to make him a free agent after this season. And I don't know, the only way this makes any sense to me at all, the only way that this could possibly make sense is if the Texans made some kind of agreement with Stephon Diggs and his camp when he was going to get traded. But that doesn't make sense because he doesn't have a no-trade clause. There's no reason why you'd have to appeal to him. If the Texans truly believe that he's that big of a locker room cancer, that they need to get rid of him as soon as possible after 1 season, or if they believe that he only has 1 good season left, which I don't. He might be declining. Don't get me wrong. But 1 season of him? That's it? You give up a second round pick for one season of Stephon Diggs. I don't think that's a good move. It was a good move when you had 4 years of Stephon Diggs. But 1 year of Stephon Diggs is not worth that high of a draft pick. It just isn't. You have what could be and what was and still is an elite receiver in the NFL, Stephon Diggs. He's a top 10 guy. He did have a little bit of a decline, don't get me wrong, but looking at what he's done, he still put up 1,100 yards, and I know the back half of the season after Week 6 was bad. I know he had that drop in the playoffs, but he's still a great receiver, and you surround him with weapons so he's not going to be that double-team target every single play. You can't double-team Stephon Diggs every play and expect to not get burned by Tank Dell or by Nico Collins or by Dalton Schultz or by Joe Mixon. That offense is stacked on the Texans. And CJ Stroud is there, he can make those throws. It's baffling to me that the Texans did this. There were obviously concerns in the locker room, but if you take those concerns in the locker room and you make them that big a deal, it really is there's no reason to trade for a guy that you don't trust in your locker room, even if he's great. There's a reason that Antonio Brown doesn't have a job in the league anymore. Not just because he's insane, mostly because he's insane, but he's one of the best receivers of all time. If he had played a full career, he could have arguably been the best receiver of all time. There were people, I don't know if you remember, back in 2015, 2016, 2017, that were having the conversation, is Antonio Brown the greatest receiver of all time? And he wasn't yet, but the pace he was on, it was at least a first ballot Hall of Fame pace, and now he's not even going to be there. He went insane, and it's a shame. Mental health is an issue, but that's a whole nother story. That's a whole nother topic. But Stephon Diggs isn't at that level. You don't need to get him out of there as quick as possible. He is still a very, very good wide receiver. He's still an elite wide receiver. He might be declining, and maybe that's what they're thinking. Maybe they're saying, oh, we can get ahead of this. We don't want to have a Dalvin Cook kind of situation where he goes for 1,000 yards and then falls off a cliff. Maybe they're thinking contract year situation will put Stephon Diggs in the mode to be the best self. I've heard all of these, but none of them make sense. Stephon Diggs doesn't need to be in a contract year to be great. He doesn't. We've seen this before. He was on the Bills for 3 seasons, and he was great in all of them. He was on the Vikings for quite some time, and he was great for a lot of them. He has been consistently a very, very good wide receiver. It doesn't make a lot of sense. And it really kind of puts a tarnish on what otherwise would have been a great trade, a great offseason for the Texans. Because they made a lot of savvy moves, a lot of moves that most teams wouldn't even think about doing. Like I said, they made that trade with the Vikings. They gave up their first round pick. They called the Vikings. The Vikings didn't call them. They were like, hey, Vikings, you want our first round pick? Yeah, I do. They did that so that they could get the ammo to make this move for Stephon Diggs. It's really good forward thinking, But then they do this. And maybe I'm being very short-sighted about this, but I don't see that fall off at wide receiver. You have guys in the league that are elite wide receivers late into their 30s. Stephon Diggs isn't that old. He's 30 years old. At 34, your wide receiver can still be really good. Really good. You look at a guy like Devontae Adams. I'm not sure how... He's 31 years old right now, But he's a year older than Stephon Diggs is, and he's still up there. He's a top 5 wide receiver in the league, no doubt. You could make the argument that he's top 3. Some people I've heard say he's the best in the league. I disagree with that, but he's definitely top 5. Devontae Adams is very good, and he hasn't shown any signs of stopping. Stephon Diggs is on that same level as Devontae Adams. There's no reason to kick him off your team. There really isn't. This is a move that I fundamentally disagree with. I think it was an awful decision, but what's done is done. I didn't even know you could do this, first of all. Like, he signed a contract that had term on it, and the Texans just voided it. They said, you can take all your money now. We'll just we don't want you on the team anymore. Basically, I did not know that you could do that. It's kind of crazy that teams can just do this, and maybe we see more teams start to do this with some of their older guys. Signed a big albatross contract. Now, both sides need to agree to this, and I think that's important. Stephon Diggs agreed to this. He's thinking he's going to get another payday, whether that be with the Texans or whether that be with someone else. But the Texans just lost a lot of their negotiating power with him. You know, if they did decide that they wanted to move on after the season, they wouldn't be able to get anything back. You know, even if they were like, we only want him for 1 year, they could flip him next season to another team, get a second-round pick back maybe even more. But as it stands, this move just baffles me. It does not really make any sense, and it's something I'm still struggling to wrap my head around. The Texans are going to be very good this season. The Texans are, with that move, I think have pushed themselves to the forefront of the AFC. Do I think they're number one in the AFC? No. You still have the Chiefs, you still have the Bengals, you still have the Ravens. They're up there in that conversation. They're going to win that division. They're going to be a top 3 seed, I believe. But best team in the league, no. The Dolphins, I think, are still very good. The Jets are great. The Bills kind of took a big decline, but the trade looks better now that they got a second for 1 year of Stephon Diggs. So maybe they can turn it around. They've just hit the cap wall, and they've hit it hard, which really makes me think about how crazy it is that the Saints have been able to do what they've been doing for as long as they've been doing it. They've been up against that cap wall forever. They've been over $100 million over the cap for like the last 3 or 4 years. They've been able to, they're not a great team anymore, but they've been able to stay mediocre this entire time while navigating that cap situation, while not really losing any of their big players like we saw the Bills do. They shed almost that entire defensive roster. So, good on the Saints. Good on their front office for being able to do that. So, there's a lot to this. A lot of new things. I think that this new cutting contract thing might be something that teams start to do now. It's expensive to do. The Texans can do it because they have the cap space, but it's expensive, and it gets guys off your books quicker that you don't want on your books, and it gives guys the opportunity to go get a bag somewhere else if they don't want to be with the team anymore. I think that's a trend we could see in the future. That's just me, though. Anyway, coming up in our fourth and final segment, we're going to talk a little bit about Bronny James. Bronny James put his name into the transfer portal a couple days ago, and he officially entered into the NBA draft today, something that you can do. I'll explain how that works and where I think he'll go, if I think he'll go to the NBA or if I think he'll stay in college, and if he does go to the NBA, what teams might draft him, and how early do you draft a guy like Bronny James? Stick around. We'll be right back on Sports by GSMC Podcast Network.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back, everybody, to Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Jeremy Lapidus. If you are just tuning in, you've missed a big show. In our first two segments, we broke down the women's Final Four happening tonight between South Carolina and NC State in the first matchup at 7. I have South Carolina winning that. And the headlining matchup of the Final Four between UConn and Paige Beckers and Iowa and Caitlin Clark. I have Iowa taking that one in a very, very close game, a coin flip of a game. And then I have South Carolina winning that championship. In the second segment, we talked about the men's Final Four. I've got UConn winning a really high-scoring game against Alabama, and DJ Burns and the NC State Wolfpack taking down Purdue in one of the biggest upsets ever to move on to the championship game for the right to lose to UConn in the finals. In our third segment, we just finished talking and breaking down the confusing nature of Stephon Diggs' contract, the weird choice that the Texans made, cutting his contract down to 1 year, if that might be a trend in the future, and much more. In our fourth and final segment here, we're going to talk about the NBA, Bronny James, and college basketball. The situation and the spotlight that he's kind of brought to it. He declared for the draft and he entered the transfer portal, something that a lot of people were unaware you could do. A lot of players have been doing it recently. It leaves your options open. When you enter the draft, you can't go back to school, but you can leave school. So it just gives you the flexibility to stay in college if you really would like. But we'll talk about his future, if he'll stay in college, if he'll go to the NBA, and if he does go to the NBA, how high should you take him, and where might he go? But before we do, if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net, leave a tip or donation. If you do, you can control what we talk about on the show. With your message and that tip and donation, you can leave a question, an opinion, something to talk about. You can control the show. We'll talk about whatever you would like to talk about. Once again, that link to leave a tip or donation is gsmcpodcast.net. We appreciate anything that you guys give. We appreciate you guys for sticking around and watching. So without further ado, let's get into our fourth and final segment. Bronny James and the NBA. Bronny James, obviously, LeBron James' son, his eldest son. He was a freshman at college this year for USC. He was injured. He had that heart condition at the beginning. So he kind of came off the bench. Excuse me. He came off the bench for them. He averaged 4 points per game, 2 assists, and 2 rebounds. So not dazzling stats. He shot 36% from the field. Not the greatest season for him. 6'4", 210. He's only a freshman. He'll get better. But he enters the transfer portal, and he also enters the NBA draft. So there's a lot of questions here. I don't believe that he will go to the NBA. I think he'll stay in college, transfer to another school for another year. But if he does decide to go to the NBA, the big question is, how high do you take him? Because a guy like Bronny James, who is putting up 4-2-2, does not deserve to go in the lottery. You could say, oh, he's a freshman, and oh, you look at this 6'4", 210, you can maybe build on that. But he's not a lottery pick. But what makes this a really interesting situation is the fact that his dad, LeBron James, the greatest basketball player of all time, is still active and has said on numerous occasions that whatever team drafts Bronny James, he will go play. And it happens to line up in a year where he has a player option. He can choose to stay with the Lakers. He can choose to go elsewhere. He said he'd sign a league minimum contract to go play with whatever team Bronny James plays on. So that gives teams a decision. Because if you are a team like the Pistons, and you're sitting there at number 1 overall, and you look at this draft class, which really is a pretty weak draft class. Some say it's one of the weakest draft classes of all time. and you see Bronny James. Sitting there, and you think, what if we could get LeBron James to Detroit? Wouldn't that be awesome? Now, I'm not sure exactly how this would go. You have, at the top of the draft class, there isn't really a clear number one. Alexandre Sarr out there, Zachary Richard, all these guys from France around the league. The first college player that they have is from UConn, Donovan Klingon. He's going 5 in some mock drafts here. G League guys, it isn't a super highly touted draft class, especially coming off one like the one we had with Victor Wembanyama in it, and the one before it with Chet and Jalen Suggs and all the other guys that were very, very good in the league so far. But if you're the Pistons, do you want to throw a number 1 draft pick at Bronny James this season? Because if you were going to do it, this is the season to do it. And that's not to say that the players in this draft class are bad, but compared to a draft class of recent memories, this NBA draft class is particularly weak. This is one of those draft classes that you sit there and you say, LeBron James, maybe I can draft him at 40 years old, which is basically what you're doing with that draft pick. And it kind of is. I'm interested to see how Bronny James feels about this, because I don't think he'll go number 1 overall. I really don't. I don't even think he'll be a lottery pick. But if he is a lottery pick, that would be because of his dad. And I'm curious to see if he really cares about that, how much he cares, because, when you get drafted to his professional sports league, it's because of what you did. You proved yourself. You made it. You did it. And that's not to say that Bronny James can't be an NBA player. I think he absolutely can be. But a number 1 overall pick kind of player? No. I don't think he's got that kind of talent. But bringing in LeBron James is a huge fish, a huge prize. You get the greatest basketball player of all time, and you get him for cheap. If LeBron James joined up with a team like, picking in the middle, not a lottery team, but a team picking in the middle, maybe a team that loses in the first round, maybe a team like, just throw out the Magic here. The Magic lose in the first round, they get picked like 14 or something like that. They draft Bronny James, they get LeBron James. That immediately puts them a lot higher up in title contention. It's a very interesting situation. Again, I'm curious to see what Bronny James feels about this. It doesn't make sense for every team to do this. But think about the Spurs with Victor Wembanyama and LeBron James. Wouldn't that be fun? Wouldn't that just be incredible? That's my little fan fiction right there. It's my little wish it happens. Spurs are going to be picking really early in the draft. It could happen. It could. Just a little pipe dream of mine. It'd be kind of like passing the torch. But anyway, you have. It is an interesting situation. I don't think Bronny James is going to the NBA. I think he's just doing this to see what scouts say, see if he entered the draft, where he would go. Because it is an interesting topic of discussion because of the unique situation that LeBron James puts Bronny James in. So we'll have to see how it plays out over the weekend. But a lot of ways that this could go. I think he'll stay in college. I think he'll go transfer to somewhere like a Kentucky. Kentucky will take him. But anyway, thank you everybody so much for tuning in to today's episode of Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. I have been your host, Jeremy Lapidus. I hope you have a great rest of your day, a great weekend. Watch some basketball. We'll be back on Monday, same time, same place, to talk about the championship game in the women's Final Four. We'll talk about the UFL Week 2. We will talk about a preview for the men's championship game that will be happening on Monday, and everything else that happens over the Wild weekend. Thank you, everybody, so much for tuning in. I'll see you Monday. Bye-bye.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn, ain't that great.